Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and yeah, I decided to go ahead and get in front of the camera today for the first informative video for the day. I've done so much training footage in the last week between Brittany and I. I think we've filmed at the gym something like 5 or 6 times in the last 9 or 10 days, if not more. Probably more. I need to actually go and check. And I've been doing a lot of voiceovers with the training footage because I have so much of it, but I really kind of need to get in front of the camera. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit. And let's talk about this whole concept of rep ranges, gaining muscle, hypertrophy, everything else. Because kind of the thing that people need to understand, when we look at the scientific research, heavy weight or moderately heavy weight with low reps, when volume is equal, is capable of building maximum muscle mass. That's not even debated. In fact, every rep range, when we've studied it, actually has the potential in the majority of the population to stimulate maximal muscle growth under the right circumstances, right? But we know that heavier weight produces more strength. So kind of the situation we get to a style of training that I often like to promote, but I'm going to admit there are drawbacks, there are problems with it. And that's the idea of, well, why don't people just lift heavy all the time to gain muscle mass too? Because they're going to gain more strength and just as much muscle. Why wouldn't they do that? It makes sense when we look at the studies. Well, because there's no such thing as a free lunch, guys. There is no such thing as a free lunch, and while I advocate that, oftentimes I also have programs that don't utilize that so much. They maybe only utilize it for blocks, and there's reasons for it. There's reasons why. But what we need to do before we jump into that, people need to understand what I'm saying regarding this stuff as far as the host of the scientific literature that's looked into all of this, looking at the layman, looking at the beginner, looking at the athlete, even studying bodybuilders, athletes, football players, everybody. The sum total of the data suggests that all rep ranges can actually stimulate maximum muscle growth. Every one of them is capable of doing it. It's just that there's a trade-off with each one, and the reason we come to the traditional hypertrophy range, that like 8 to 12 rep range, is because it does so with the fewest number of minutes in the gym. In other words, it's the easiest way to stimulate maximum muscle growth if you're trying to cut down time in the gym. If an extra 10 minutes in the gym or an extra 15 minutes in the gym is going to be a problem for a person and their goals are purely size, they're just wanting to get bigger, they want to get stronger, they want other things, they're just trying to get out of the gym quickly, there's something to be said for that range. Because what we found with the data is that when you take that 8 to 12 rep range, when you're doing multiple sets, you can actually get real close to maximum hypertrophy in a few sets. With pretty much any exercise that's a primary mover in a muscle, you're going to stimulate maximum muscle growth, at least in the majority of heads in that muscle, 3 or 4 sets. Once you start going above about 70% intensity in that 8 to 12 rep range, 3 to 4 sets will stimulate pretty much as much muscle growth as you're going to get out of that muscle, barring a few heads. Which is why sometimes supplemental exercises come in handy, because not every exercise thoroughly works a muscle. But if you do enough volume, even with a smaller exercise selection, it will actually compensate for that and will actually stimulate extra growth in the heads that don't get hit as much if you just do enough volume. But that rep range is very good at it. Now we know that higher rep ranges, stuff like 15, 20 to 30 rep range, studies show it builds just as much size. Now me with a strength training background, me with a powerlifting background, I don't want to hear that. I'm like, no, I don't want to hear it. But it's true. The evidence supports it. I can sit around and deny it. You can deny it. But we can deny it and put our fingers in our ears all day long. It seems to actually be true, though. And I don't like it. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Using 30% of your back, doing 30 rep sets of curls. Oh, my God. But it actually does work. It actually works. And the scientific evidence is there. It can actually build muscle. And if you're doing multiple sets and you're taking those to failure with those really high reps, yeah, you can stimulate nearly maximum muscle growth that way. The problem is that it takes as much time as the others, meaning an 8 to 10 rep set or a 10 rep set stimulates about the same growth that 30 rep set does. It takes a while. If you're going to come in and do 4 sets of 30 reps on an exercise, That's time consuming with no additional muscle growth. In other words, you're coming in doing 120 reps on, say, your barbell squat, instead of coming in and doing 40 with sets of 10. It takes a hell of a lot longer. And it's the same amount of muscle growth. We don't see a difference. So there's a time constraint end on that, and you build more stamina, but you could do that with cardio also. So again, there's a downside there. Now we jump over to the other direction. We've got multiple studies now that show that even sets of 3 reps, when total workload is equal on a given exercise, produces the same muscle growth as like 10 rep sets do. Now here's the kicker. You can do 3 sets of 10, and where there have been studies comparing these, where the people did 3 sets of 10, full range of motion, proper form. They stimulated good muscle growth doing 3 sets of 10. What they found is like 7 sets of 3. All right, that's 21 total reps, equals about the same tonnage. If you work with the same level of perceived exertion, like let's say you're putting in about 90% of your maximum effort into those sets, right? And you're doing about 90% of the most you could do. That's actually good enough to stimulate max growth. 100% doesn't seem to actually matter. When you do 3 sets of 10, it usually equals about the same amount of weight moved as if you do 7 sets of 3 with the same amount of effort, meaning a amount of weight on the bar roughly equal to where it feels just as hard. Because there's a heavier weight, those 21 reps, if you were to multiply the weight times the number of reps, those 21 reps equal about the same amount of total pounds or kilos or tons moved as the others. When they're equal workloads and we study 2 different groups and have one group do one group do the other, they gain about the same amount of muscle, meaning no statistical difference, because there's variation from person to person. You know, different people will gain muscle at different rates, but when we get good sized groups, we get like 10 or 20 people in each group, so that you've got a good variety of genetics, they gain about the same amount of muscles. No measurable average difference. There's differences from person to person because people have different genetics, different structures. Not everyone gains muscle as fast. But with enough people, it seems to balance out. They're equally good. Now, people would say, okay, well, that's cool. So they're just as good. And the people who do the 3 rep sets with the heavier weight get a little stronger faster. So at first, we look at that and say, okay, well, that's clearly the superior way to train. And I would argue that for multifaceted goals, it oftentimes can be, particularly for certain phases. The downside, there's no free lunch. First of all, time differences. Look at break between sets. If you take 3 minutes, which seems to be about the ideal number, you need at least 3 minutes between sets, even to maximize hypertrophy. And that's a big thing that really has thrown stuff out there. A lot of people are like, bodybuilders will do these 60-second rests between sets. Guess what? We found out 3-minute breaks actually produce more muscle growth. It actually makes you bigger because you can lift more weight on the second, third, fourth set, everything else. More tonnage. More tonnage. Actually, tonnage moved, work done, total work that you force a muscle to do during a workout seems to be the biggest factor in how much it grows. The biggest factor. So when you cut the breaks down and you have to lift less weight, you don't grow as much from it. So 3 minutes between those. Well, you figure about a minute and a half, 2 minutes tops to do the actual sets, 3 minutes between them. That's what, about 8 minutes? You can do 3 sets of 10 on a squat or a bench press or a lat pull down, whatever. You can do that in about 8 minutes, right? Fair enough, barring whatever warm-ups you do. Throw in some warm-ups, okay, 10 minutes. How long does it take to do 7 sets of 3? Well, you got 6 breaks between sets. That's 18 minutes. The sets themselves are probably another 2 minutes. You're at 20 minutes plus whatever warm-ups you're going to do. We go from 10 minutes, let's say your warm-ups take a couple of minutes. So you go from about 8 minutes up to about 22 minutes for one exercise to stimulate the same amount of growth. You guys see where this is going? You see the problem there? All right, it's real easy to come into the gym and do 5 different exercises if you only have to invest 10 minutes in each exercise, counting the warm-ups, right? 50 minutes. You can do 5 exercises, stimulate pretty solid amount of muscle growth, and be out the door in an hour or less. And that's if you want to do 5 different exercises and you want to do 3 full sets and warm-ups, right? 15 sets, you're done. And I don't care whether we're talking a body part split, an upper, lower, or full body, which is what I generally promote. Still, 5 exercises, 3 sets, you're done. How many exercises can you do with the other? About 2 in the same amount of time? In other words, you can do 2.5 times as many different exercises and everything else with the 10 rep sets. All right, if you wanted to do 5 different exercises with the other, you're going to be in the gym a couple of hours. You'll be in the gym 2 hours for the same amount of muscle growth. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get stronger. You're going to gain just as much muscle, and you're going to be a bit stronger. But it's an extra hour every workout. If you're doing multiple exercises, potentially, see the problem, there's a time economy difference, and not everyone wants to invest that sort of time in lifting in the gym, particularly since we all need to be doing cardio for health. We all need conditioning work. We need other stuff besides lifting. If we want to be fit and healthy, we've got to do other stuff besides lifting. There's a big time commitment component to doing it that way. It doesn't work into everyone's schedule, doesn't work into everyone's life. Then the other problem we run into, technique, form. You've got to be more careful. When you're lifting heavier weight repeatedly, you've got to pay more attention to your fatigue. You've got to pay more attention to your form, because form breakdowns run a higher risk of injury. You are more likely, if you're not being careful, not deloading correctly, paying attention to form, there is a slightly higher injury risk. So it's more time investment, more injury risk. Now, we could argue on the other end, obviously it's a superior way to train if we're purely looking at how much muscle and strength can I put on. It's superior. Time constraints, lifestyle, injury risk, it has drawbacks on the other end. So like I was saying, it is in certain ways a superior way to train, but if you can't do it consistently and you can't make it work ideally into your lifestyle and motivation, it's not superior anymore, is it? Hence the downside, hence the juxtaposition. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.